Yes, people elections. We talk about it for the next 2 hours here on the Horse Racing Happy Hour. His name's Matthew DeSantis. He's a big Italian. I'm Louis Raveau, a very real Belgian, hanging out with you today on the Horse Racing Happy Hour. Of course, it is Peter Pan weekend at Aqueduct Racecourse, one of my favorite places on the planet. So we had to go to Matthew there on Long Island. Is that a surfboard behind you? That's a little disingenuous if it is.
It is a surfboard that is a speaker that is behind me. And
okay,
yes,
that's kind of cool. I like that.
Yeah, thank you.
American Pope. I know you're not a Catholic guy, but are you surprised we got an American? I got to be real honest, as a Catholic guy, very surprised.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, one of the few non-Italian Catholic, or one of the few non-Catholic Italians, I should say. Thanks to my mom for raising me. Yeah, non-Italian Catholic. Yeah, that's all. That's a whole other discussion. Yeah, right. But
you leave my kids on.
I was very excited to see the American Pope. You mentioned the Chicago connection, obviously upper Midwest, but also went to Villanova. Shout out to my home area of Philadelphia. So excited to see that. And in all honesty, it's obviously a monumental moment to have an American Pope, and Leo the 14th is going to be ushering in obviously a new era in the Catholic Church. And my background is in religion and politics in terms of my graduate dissertation and academic research. So yes, I find this very interesting, but I also find horse racing interesting. So we can talk about that too.
We can do that as well. Rerum Novarum was the major piece of Pope Leo the 13th's pontificate. It is on the rights and on the rights and duties of capital and labor. So if you're interested in what Pope Leo the 14th is going to be talking about, it's probably that as we head into automation and AI and all of the things in the modern era. But Matthew DeSantis at Failed to Menace on all the socials joins us here from Naira Bets on the program. Derby in the rear view. Matthew, I feel very good because I had the first and second nailed down in my picks, and then my fourth pick ran third. So I felt very good about myself post-race in the Kentucky Derby. I thought, frankly, Matthew, one of the rare cases where we say, these 5 horses are going to go to the front, and they did. These horses are going to stalk, and they did. Mm-hmm. And then Sovereignty is going to be the best deep closer, and he was. One of the rare cases where we could kind of just look at paper, and it actually just worked out that way.
It was, and I think it really does speak to a little bit of a different feel from the last few years, where not to take anything away from the winning horses, but it did feel like a little bit, not fluky necessarily, but like, man, what a perfect trip. Man, what a great, just what a rail skimming ride. What, just kind of coming out of nowhere. Some of the favorites didn't fire. It felt like a very formful Derby where you go, the best 2 horses. I think most of us all week were saying Journalism and Sovereignty were the best 2 horses in the race. Now, you could have tried to beat them in other creative ways, or you might have said, well, I don't know if Sovereignty gets to trip from the back, etc. But nobody doubted the talent of those 2 horses. They put on the show, and it was great to see. Journalism ran his race, and Sovereignty just ran a little bit better. Baeza ran his race, and, Final Gambit, ran a big race, obviously, for the Jeff Ruby, being able to kind of continue to show that they belong in the Kentucky Derby picture. And a horse like Owen Almighty, I think that was probably the biggest surprise out of the top 5.
Yes. No, it almost a horse middle finger to all of us that were like, that's a Pat Day Mile horse. Honestly, just a terrific run. Even Trader Brian Lynch was like, he's probably a miler. And like in the future, he might be, right? And that's totally fine. If he's a mile horse next year or something, like that's obviously completely fine. If he's a Woodward horse this summer, something like that, that would be obviously totally fine. And so I like, okay, we will get to Sovereignty and Belmont and not Preakness and things in a second. The reason that part stings so badly is because actually the rest of it set up very well. We get a West Coast horse in Baeza to add to Journalism as one of the very good horses in the 3-year-old crop. We get a Cox who looks great on synthetic and then all of a sudden shows up on dirt, no problem at all. Could be a problem all summer. Yeah. We get a Rodriguez shipping straight to Preakness. We get a River Thames, these sorts of horses. So we've actually had all of the normal setups. And then, like we said, maybe an Owen Almighty turns into a 1-turn monster in this 3-year-old class, like we saw, a domestic product, not necessarily a monster, but, was able to go the distance and move into a grade 1 that way. We had all of those things except Sovereignty going to Baltimore. And so that's why it's to be so disappointing. But I think for those of us, Matthew, who do this every week, when you talk about Godolphin, what they do to them is bigger than the American Triple Crown. I don't know another way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, they are a global powerhouse, and they will look at, and when you combine that with Belmont, who is always going to do right by the horses, always going to take a more conservative approach probably than some other trainers might. I mean, just look at a horse like Arthur's Ride is back training and potentially pointing to the Met Mile. That horse Mott has been incredibly patient with and just like taking him so slowly because he's a big horse and takes a long time for him to develop. But, he's going to take the long view of all of these things. And I know it's frustrating for some people, but I think people also are overreacting a little bit. It's understandable to be deflated by the news that, the Derby went.
Yes.
Absolutely. I totally get it. The reality is the only two other horses that have skipped in recent years is Country House, who was dealing with an illness, and Rich Strike, who I'll just say I think was terribly managed in a lot of ways. And so it's not a norm by any stretch. And so I think that it is something where we assume it might become a norm, but until it does, until next year and the year after that Derby winner skips, I don't want to jump to conclusions and, try to change something that's worked for 150 years, basically. So, I think it's one of those things. It's understandable. People are a little disappointed by it, but, there, like you said, a lot of great confluence of things going on, and it's going to be setting up a really exciting summer. One thing I will say, just going back very briefly to the Owen Almighty comment, is watching that replay. He took a misstep late in the stretch and was really leg weary. And in my opinion, it really was a little bit of an indictment on 6 through 19, particularly like 6, 7, 8, 9, that like nobody could get past Owen Almighty. And I'm like, what this horse was being eased up by the jockey. I mean, it was not being asked for anything more, was basically cantering home, was not fully extended in any way, shape, or form, and was really being geared down. And yet nobody could get past him. Now, I know Burnham Square had some trouble, and that was the horse that finished 6th. But, a horse like Sandman, really, I thought disappointed. A horse like Tistastic, really disappointed coming from the back. So, Publisher, everybody's wise guy. Oh, the Maiden's going to win. No, he's not. So it's one of those things where I think there's, maybe you can cast some doubts on the lower end of the Derby outcomes, but that top 4 or 5 really has a bright future for this summer.
Isn't it interesting, too? And you mentioned Rich Strike earlier.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting that it's okay to bag on that horse and say he was no good and not worthy of winning the Derby, and then to turn around by the same people and use him in the no one goes to the Preakness argument anymore?
Right.
No. You don't get both. You don't get to tell me he was a bum and then tell me that none of the horses go to the Preakness anymore and use him as an example. That's where I would hard draw the line here, is all of the detractors of Rich Strike. Yeah. The world is very simple for me in horse racing, Matthew. That horse crossed the finish line first. He didn't foul anybody. That's the Derby winner. Period. End of conversation. Steve Asmussen doesn't have one, and Sonny Leon does. That's how the Kentucky Derby works. That's just how it works. I don't want to hear as part of the argument about the Preakness that Rich Strike didn't go when everyone listening told me he was a massive bum. You don't get to have both. Never.
No.
You do not get to have both. Choose one narrative here. Either Rich Strike matters or he doesn't.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think it's much more about the fact that I think, again, you can look back. I think, again, hindsight's 2020 for everybody. And you look back and it really was more about, in my opinion, maybe that horse just being mismanaged in a lot of ways. I don't think he was a bum at all. I think he got a perfect setup and a perfect trip that day. But something, that happens to a lot of horses that win the Derby. Yeah. They all need a perfect setup and a perfect
trip. Dan was able to cut the corner. No one else was. Yes. These things
absolutely.
By the way, Brian Hernandez Jr., good on him for doing it. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. No, if Brian doesn't squeeze through that hole, Mystic Dan doesn't win that race. I mean, so there, these things happen in Derbies. And so I think, and listen, the reality is that Rich Strike went on and, performed well, finished second by a nose in that Lucas Classic, finished 4th in the Breeders' Cup Classic, had some other good performances. So, it was certainly, like I said, a little, you're right, disingenuous by people to, try to make one argument and not the other necessarily. So Louis is frozen. So this is I will just keep going until Louis is able to rejoin us. Now you get a longer view of our surfboard in the back. But yeah, listen, with regards to the Preakness, just to kind of keep going until Louis is able to get back. I think one of the things that's really interesting is with sovereignty not going, journalism still a little bit of a question mark. Baez obviously going back to California. This now leads to, I think, a question of, is this Rodriguez's race to lose in a lot of ways? He's going to be a horse that's going to be up on the front end for Bob Baffert, although Baffert just announced today that Goal Oriented, the horse that won the allowance race on the undercard of the Derby, is coming back and going to be running in the Preakness as well. So Bob's going to have 2 horses there. Of course, he's won this race 8 times, looking for a record 9th time to potentially win it. I think you have a horse like River Thames, who's potentially coming back for Todd Pletcher. And so now that my filibustering is over, talking about Preakness 150, Louis is back with us. He is not frozen anymore. So I was just kind of not ranting, but I was just kind of giving an overview and synopsis of Preakness 150 while you were gone.
I do not know why I cannot hear you at all. So I got to work on that. Hang on.
All right. So I will continue to talk a little bit about
Preakness
150. I can hear you, Louis.
Oh, you can hear me. Okay, that's fantastic. Wait, great. Fantastic for me. All right, let me clear this out a little bit here. Matthew, why don't we reboot? I will get things set back up. We'll do a second part of this episode. I'll find you in just a second. Okay.
All right. Sounds good.